Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gnostic Informant and Myth Vision podcast. I have Neal with me joined. We were both, I think, can we say that you were a mythicist?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
I thought you were. I am. I know I was.
Full-blown believer in the mythicist idea.
Okay, same here. I was definitely a mythicist. I thought Jesus did not exist. And so I wanted to talk about mythicism, but not just like critique it or why we're not mythicists, but go in why it's attractive and why something like this is something that I think makes a lot of sense to a lot of people, but how it's helped us hone our understanding and deepen our knowledge of trying to dive deeper into the historical Jesus, the rise of Christianity and stuff. Before we dive into that, I just want to give an example. There have been many positions and ideas that I have found to be not true, in my view, that I'm not persuaded by, at least, right? At least I'm not convinced of them, that have helped me to study and know deeper on a topic. If it weren't for it, for example, I don't think I'd know what I know today or be as knowledgeable and deep in it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You just, like a light bulb just went off my head when you said that, because it helps, being a mythicist, going from full-blown Christian to then getting into some sort of spiritual, well, it's, maybe it's not all true, but there's something out there.
Yeah.
You did the same thing, right?
Yep.
And then going all the way, the pendulum swings all the way full-blown atheist, anti-theist, mythicist.
Yeah.
I had all those titles.
Yep.
I was bad. Atheist, mythicist, anti-theist. Oh, wow. No one likes those people.
Right.
But anyways, I was one of those, and I just was like, I had a bone to pick. I had an itch to scratch. I was ready to fight. And then I put myself out there in the arena of ideas, made a YouTube channel, got tested. People respond. Hey, that's not really a good approach. Your methodology is bad. Oh, don't you know the difference between plausibility and possibility, or like the levels of like how we can know things? Mm-hmm. I started learning about that kind of stuff. Instead of just what my opinion is and I want it to be true, I started learning, because I'm putting myself out there and testing myself and being receptive to criticism. It led me to start to learn and hone in on a methodology, on how I know things, epistemology. Yeah. How can we know if a guy existed? Well, we could know if someone named Caesar existed, mm-hmm. because we have coins in his name. And for example, Augustus succeeded Caesar, Julius Caesar, and then Tiberius succeeded Augustus. Well, someone had to be there to be succeeded. So mm-hmm. someone was there. And what is his name? Well, all the different sources are corroborating with each other, and nobody can test that Augustus was the guy who reigned for 40 years
right.
between 30 BC and 14 AD.
Right.
Everyone says it was Caesar Augustus, formerly known as Octavian. We just have the evidence is overwhelming.
Right.
But what about a guy named Jesus of Nazareth, who's not in control of a government, who's not fighting wars, right. who's not leaving trails behind? He's not, he's more of a needle in a haystack. So what is said about him? Is it plausible that there's a guy running around Judea? Is it plausible? Were there miracle workers around this time? Were there people claiming to be Messiahs at this time? Those are all true things. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So then it gets into like, what can I prove versus what can I disprove?
Right, because you can't grab the guy's femur bone to here he is, and you can't go, here's this inscription from the 30s that actually, from the time this guy existed, this was actually an inscription in stone that he wrote or his right-hand man wrote at the time. No, you have these texts which are written on animal skin or papyri, and they're decades later. You get notes from a guy who never met the dude writing letters to churches which are being passed on, and we don't get any of these original documents at all till later. You get comments by people about Christians, so there's no like real first-hand persons who met him that are writing authoritatively, historically, or anything like that. It's all of this really, I guess you could say, a bit speculative based on our best knowledge. And he's a needle in a haystack, like you said. Yeah. But before we continue getting into mythicism and why this is an appropriate idea that should be seriously taken as serious in the academic circles for various forms, not just Richard Carrier's idea, but like different academic positions, I want to make one point. Something I noticed when I started to kind of become more of a, I think there might have been a guy kind of person. And that is, what you'll see is the apologetics, the apologist side, go You thought he didn't exist? How stupid! I could quote Bart Ehrman.
Bart Ehrman, right?
And, you know,
even Bart Ehrman says
you're such an idiot.
He's the archaeologist, right?
They mock, right? They
Yeah.
mock. And have we ever paused for 1 second and said, you mean the guy who thinks a virgin gave birth and a guy walked on water and a dude rose out of a tomb and ascended into a cloud and floated up into heaven? These guys who believe that happened are mocking you for thinking a guy may not have existed because your texts are full of holes, mythology, legend, invented narratives, fabricated material, most likely, potentially even fabricated eyewitness stuff, like all of this.
Yep.
So when you see that rhetoric coming from the guys like Cameron Bertuzzi, right? He on his YouTube channel, he literally has he's interviewing priests, exorcists about demons and crawling up the walls and speaking in Latin and all this stuff. People believe this stuff that they're saying, and he believes it, and they mock mythicists.
Yeah, and I want to make something really, really clear. Even though I'm no longer a mythicist, I've since gone more back into the middle, and I guess you can label me as a minimal mythicist, where I guess you think there's a guy, but you think the stories written about
That'd
him
be a minimal historicist, I think, if you think there was a guy.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, but you're more almost agnostic in the middle, neutral, but also lean. Maybe there was a guy.
Because I would say majority, past 90% of what's written about him didn't actually happen. It's either drawing from Old Testament motifs or cultural milieu motifs in the time period. However, even though I'm not a mythicist, even though I've battled mythicists on my channel, I've had some videos made about me from mythicists. I'm not very liked by the mythicist community. But let's get real here. People saying that mythicism is like flat earth of scholarship needs to go. We're talking about a guy who might not have existed. We don't have physical evidence of him. Mm-hmm. We don't know where he was buried. None of his followers have written anything. We don't have anything written down from the actual Peter.
Right.
Paul's letters come, but Paul never really was around Jesus. He never met Jesus. He claims to see him in a vision.
Right.
So everything that comes, all the evidence about Jesus comes from after his life. We don't have anything from the time in which he was alive, which means we don't have any eyewitness accounts. Right. We have secondary accounts, people claiming to know eyewitnesses.
Right, right.
So right off the bat, we should at least be skeptical of what's going on here.
I agree.
The idea that this is accepted, it's figured out, let's not even debate this, that's flat earth, is nonsense.
Yeah.
Because think about this. If you woke up tomorrow and the government and all the scientists got together and says, it's true, the earth is flat, how blown away would you be that you were wrong the whole time?
Right.
And this turns out the flat earth people online were right. You'd be blown away. But let's say tomorrow you woke up and a bunch of experts in history or whatever, archaeology or whatever, found something that totally makes it impossible for Jesus to have existed. And you go, whoa, he didn't exist. Would you be just as shocked as you would about the earth being flat?
No.
So let's end the whole flat earth thing.
Yeah, I don't think it's an equivalent thing.
Or the moon being cheese, as Bart Ehrman says.
Right. I think that's used because of he's using polemics, and I think it's because there's this back and forth beef that's happened. So it's more rhetorical than actually he's literally meaning.
I don't think it's fair.
Yeah, I get it.
I think it's a possibility that Jesus didn't exist.
I agree.
Even though right now as we speak, I stand thinking there probably was a guy
that was mythologized.
I think it makes the most sense with the data that we have.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
If someone doesn't think that the evidence is good and they just want to think he didn't exist, or maybe he's the character of Jesus Christ has some sort of drawing from people that did exist, 'cause that's still mythicism.
Yeah.
It's still a mythicism.
You can be that.
You can be drawn from Simon of Galilee, Judas of Galilee, and they're sort of making a composite character. Whatever. I'm just saying. I'm just throwing random examples. Someone might hold that opinion, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
I don't think there's anything crazy about that at all. The one thing that I'm not sold by is it's a more modern approach to mythicism, where instead of just saying the whole thing was made up, as you get from the 19th and 20th century mythicists, what I'm seeing recently is the different approach, where it seems like it's more like stretching evidence, there was a cult of a Jesus cult worshiping a godlike being named Jesus in these Jewish communities, and then he became humanized.
Yeah.
I don't see that. I've never been sold by that. I don't think there's any evidence to support that.
Right.
So I just want to give myself on both sides.
Yeah, I get it. You're saying this should be taken seriously. We should have this discussion, and it's interesting to have a different take being brought into the picture. And it shouldn't be equated with flat Earth or denying the Holocaust or any of this kind of stuff. But at the same time,
I think the older model of mythicism makes more sense than the newer model.
Okay. Well, I just think the people, just so that we're clear, that are telling you to like laugh it away and stuff, typically are coming from people who are typically telling you, I believe this dude was born of a real virgin, ignoring all the other divine births, but willing to say this one special one happened.
Or you get people, like Tim O'Neill, who is he just has a bone to pick with mythicists because they've been going back and forth for so long. And so it seems like he's sort of locked in, and anyone who holds that position is an idiot, not following the scholars, dumb, doesn't read, that type of thing. So I do think that emotional response isn't just people who believe in, people who hold to historicism. Their emotional response isn't just people who believe, but it's also people who have some sort of beef with mythicists.
Right. Again, do you think ego...
Like, they criticized him because he said the word wrong in Greek. He defined Guinness, I think it was something like that. Remember the Guinness or something? Okay,
born of a woman or something?
Yeah, and he made a claim that was wrong, and they're all like laughing at him for it. So now he wants to make the fun of it. I get it.
It's polemics back and forth. Yeah, I want to get into a few things that made me think maybe some of the mythology, and there's overlap of strange stuff that, like you were bringing up an example in this Roman book of when the celebration or Easter takes place in the stories of the Gospels. Literally, historically, the setting is under Tiberius. Jesus is actually living in the 30s under Emperor Tiberius. So here you have this emperor. Is it Claudius? Or
Claudius.
Who actually creates this? Discuss that example with Attis there.
These are some of the things that make me go, mythicism needs to be back on the table.
Or at least an option, right?
Yeah. So this is another published book by Blackwell called The Cults of the Roman Empire by Robert Turkin. And right off the bat, in the first chapter called The Great Mother and Her Eunuchs, he talks about this festival by the Romans called the Hilaria. James Fraser writes about this as well. But he says, at all events, it was apparent... Actually, let me go back a little bit. Let me start with this imperial... I'm just going to I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to get to the big points.
Okay. And just so we're on the same page, like you can disagree with the whole category of mythicism and still say this might actually make you think that this didn't happen historically. This example of Jesus may have been invented based on...
Did he actually go down for Passover on March 25th
and this happened? Or is that an invented narrative?
This does kind of question that.
Right.
He might have died in September.
You don't know when he might have died.
We don't know. Right. We just accept that he went down on Passover.
The Gospel
says so.
Right.
But this might me think otherwise, because look, the chapter is called Imperial Phrygianism. And the reason why he says that is because in 204 BCE, right before the Romans defeated Hannibal, they're still a little republic. They're not a big empire yet. Hannibal's whooping them. Apparently, this is mythological, obviously. This is legendary. This is what the sources say. Livy says this. Apparently, the Sibylline oracle, told the Romans to go to Phrygia and import the statue of the Great Mother, Cybele. And they go and do this. They bring the mother back. They set up the statue of the Great Mother. They institute a new cult, Phrygian cult of Cybele in Rome. Mm-hmm. And apparently, that's how they won the war against.
Of course.
Okay. So now that's the backstory. 200 years later, now we're in the empire. Claudius is like the fourth emperor. I think it's Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius. Okay. Fourth emperor. I was right. Good guess. Claudius comes along in the 40s AD, right after Jesus dies in the 30s. Mm-hmm. This is what happens. He says, the grandson of Livia Augusta, belonged to the family. That's why it's called the Julian Claudian dynasty.
Right.
This is Claudius. The grandson of Livia belonged to a family whose clan name was Attis, Attius, and went back to the famous Sabine Atta Clausus and recalled the very name of Attis, Papa. Claudius took great interest in the mysteries of Eleusis when he tried in vain to bring across the herbs, and his erudition, encouraged by the historian Livy, I was just telling you that story, had perhaps led him to read the work of Timotheus on the religion of Pessinus. And okay, I'll explain this.
Explain this.
Timotheus is a 3rd century BC Hellenistic author living in Alexandria under Ptolemy, who writes the myth about Attis.
Got it.
That's the myth of Attis that we have today, about Attis being beloved by the Great Mother, dying of castration, and the Great Mother rising him up, making him a god in the form of a pine tree.
And by the way,
very odd resurrection. It's not like a bodily resurrection. It's an agricultural resurrection.
Got it.
Very prime example of that. And so that's that. So he's saying that Claudius is bringing this into the fold of Roman religion at this time period. In the 1st century, remember that. This is before the Gospels are written.
Of course.
This is before Paul's epistles are even finished. He might have had one of them out by this point. I don't even know when Paul's dated to. 40s, 50s, right?
They say like 40s into the 50s.
Yeah, so we're talking 40s. We're talking Paul is running around the Mediterranean. This is just getting started in Rome. And by the way, before this, they did have a Great Mother festival called the Megalesia, which was the 1st week of April. So there already was a precedent. They already had an April festival for Cybele and Attis. But this one is different. This one is focused on resurrection. Let me explain.
Okay.
It says, Claudius instituted and had inscribed the Roman calendar, a ceremony which, after a fashion, opened the Holy Week of the god Attis, the entry of a tree on December 22nd. The Brotherhood of Woodcutters, Dendrophori, wood bearers, would trace its foundation to an August 1st birthday of Claudius, carried in procession to the Palatine Temple a pine tree felled in the memory of the tree at whose foot Attis had destroyed his virility, or he castrated himself.
Yeah.
The festival implies at least part of the cycle of celebrations which, in later calendars, mark the 2nd fortnight in March. For that procession of the tree, they liturgically reenacted the phases that were indissociable from the foundation myth. And I'm going to blow past this.
And the foundation myth being
the castration of Attis dying
into the tree,
mourning by the Great Mother, mourning over the death and his resurrection.
Got it.
On the 3rd day. And I'll tell you why. He says, on the 22nd of March, a pine tree had been cut. At the end of the night, a ram was sacrificed, its blood bathing the roots of the tree. There's another example of being washed in the blood of a sacrificial animal. Remember we talked about Dionysus as the bull?
Yep.
Talk about, and by the way, in this cult, you can look this up. It might not be in this chapter, but in the cult of the Great Mother, just like it's also in the cult of the Mithraic Mysteries, they both did this.
Yeah.
It's called the Torabolium. They would have an initiate sit in a chamber, and they'd bring a bowl in the top chamber, and the blood would wash the new initiates. They were washed in the blood of the sacrificial animal.
And I don't want to make parallelomelia here about the cross, but being a piece of wood stake that
is kind of interesting.
I mean, you're dealing with wood. This could be complete parallelomelia. I am totally just throwing spaghetti.
But let me say something about that. Jesus still could have been crucified, and they could have thought, hey, that's like Attis in the tree.
Right, he's on a tree. I mean, like there's examples of Odin, right?
Way around.
There's examples of Odin on a tree self-sacrificing.
Yeah.
So the tree motif is there, and we're not saying necessarily the cross is that.
But
notice even today how prevalent a bloody Jesus on a cross is for Christian mythology. So whether or not
doing this, they do. I'm sorry.
No. I'm fucking vibing with you, dude. Please.
Finish your thought, though.
I just wonder, completely speculative, and someone will get into the details and pick me apart. I don't agree. This is different. But because Jews were commonly crucified. But the question is the mythos, the narrative playing into this tree motif of a lamb, symbolized human, just being sacrificed on the wood of this tree?
Yeah.
That here's this ceremony, but it's in a Judaic context.
And get this, they have, on the Day of Blood, which was March 24th, they would actually have people, frenzied rites of scourging, they called it, the Day of Blood, sanguis. and they would bring people out in the streets of Rome in the procession, and they would whip each other. They would hurt. They would do like symbolic whipping each other,
right?
Because this is like, I don't know. It's part of the ritual.
It's a self-pain, maybe Attis.
But think about Jesus carrying his cross, being whipped by the Roman soldier,
right?
And this is in Rome.
Yeah. So and the fact that Jesus is wearing a purple robe and it's a mockery of Roman emperor, and it's like, dude,
it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have that. We have and I didn't finish what I was saying about the March 22nd thing.
Okay, sorry.
No, but you're fine. You're fine. The pine tree was cut. They fell the pine tree. It bathes in blood. They do this thing where people are getting whipped in the streets. They're all like frenzied up. This is a really crazy experience. They did a processional funeral through Rome, and that's the day they mourn for the death of Attis. An image of Attis had been attached to the tree as it's buried.
Okay, pause. We just need to say something about that.
Yeah.
When you see an image of the cross with an image of Jesus on it, you can't tell me that there's not, like, you can understand why I'm thinking early Christians have a man on a cross, okay?
Right.
Like, there is clear iconography of Jesus. It's not just a fish symbol. Like, you get Christians who start symbolizing clearly having Jesus as an image on a cross, a tree, a wooden, it's not a living tree, it doesn't have the greenery, it's a stake or wooden cross post. So, you know,
like I said, he could have been crucified still. We don't have to assume it's drawing from this, but they could have said him being crucified is a lot like Attis being pinned to a tree.
Right.
And then they could have drew the motifs up together like
clearly,
that.
If Roman emperors, which would have made the propaganda of this particular cultic practice spread through like wildfire in the empire. If there are Gentiles in the empire who are seeing this and are attracted into the Attis mythology and motif of the Caesar, and Jesus is constantly propagandistically being the new emperor and the better one that brings peace, the Pax Romana forever, not a temporary Pax Romana.
You're getting ahead of me.
Okay, sorry. I'm hyping with you, bro.
You already know where I'm going with this.
Okay.
That's all I got to say.
Got it.
But I want to finish the rituals.
Let's do it.
So you have the Day of Blood. On the third day, the 25th, the third day, marks, oh, by the way, he points out this, the author says, and this is true, I looked into the sources. In Egypt, they have the same festival. It's still called the Hilaria, because Romans are in charge in Egypt. Right. But it's for Osiris.
So what is the problem? So why can't it be...
They switched it from Attis to Osiris.
Well, why can't it be Jesus?
Right. And by the way, people have been pointing this out, that by this time period, in the 2nd and 3rd century especially, they're synchronized. I hate using the word syncretized, but that's kind of what they're doing.
It's what they're doing.
You had these Dionysian gods like Ion. Ion's a 2nd century god. You find mosaics of him in Syria, this god Ion. And these Neoplatonist authors are saying he's like a combination of Osiris and Adonis and Dionysus. So you have other gods, like if it was to happen with Jesus, it could have happened, or if it happened with these other gods, Ion, was to say that Jesus isn't a Jewish version of this.
Right.
But let's put that aside for now. On the third day, on March 25th, this is the exact same day that Jesus resurrects.
Got it.
It's Easter Sunday. This is the same, according to the Gospels.
Yeah.
This is the day that Jesus is resurrected.
Right.
March 25th. According to the Gospels. That's the 14th of Nisan.
Got it.
It lines up that way.
Hebrew calendar.
Yeah, Hebrew calendar.
For those
this is the 14th of Nisan. The resurrection of Attis was proclaimed. At least, it says, and he says, at least as the 4th century texts tell us. So let's be real.
Okay.
That's when we have a source from a Christian author mentioning, he uses the word resurrection.
Right.
Before that, we only know about like the festival was happening during this week.
Got it.
So we have sources. The source that actually says there's a resurrection is a 4th century source.
Got it.
And it says the dead Attis at the foot of the pine tree, a little Attis standing in some sense, was reborn. The name Hilaria means rejoicings. Okay.
So they're mourning 3 days before.
The same week,
which is the same day that the women mourn at the tomb. The disciples mourn.
We have mourning.
3 days later, they celebrate.
Rites. We have a ritual mourning, we have frenzied rites, we have a burial, we have a 3-day procession, and we have a resurrection and rejoicing in the same exact week as Easter.
Right. Coincidence?
Same exact week.
Coincidence.
Some people will say it was.
Of course they would.
And I've heard people say, hey, it is pretty interesting, but I just don't know how much can we... Yeah.
Nobody's saying it can't be.
It's possible, but I don't think so.
But it's hard for us when we've done the, like, all right, let's shift off of that for 1 second just to the Roman stuff. We have scholars who've written excellent commentaries on Mark, other texts that show that the Roman imperial cult, that author is well aware of it.
Yeah.
They know what the Roman imperial cult teaches. They know their propaganda and are really working Jesus into a narrative to where he is better than the Caesar.
Exactly.
So why is it that a festival that is literally like invented in a way, it's there's already something there, but like really capitalizing on this thing that's supposedly happening in the period of time in which they place the Jesus character, this is when this cult practice happens. And why wouldn't this be influential? I don't understand.
What? This is the crazy thing. The Nicene preacher claimed in the 2nd century, so we're talking early on, Christianity's a little baby in the 2nd century.
Right.
The Gospels are written at the end of the 1st.
Potentially just 2nd century even. Yeah,
this might be within decades of the Gospels being written.
Right.
There's a kind of the first generation of Christians other than the actual disciples.
Right.
So we're like, that's almost like a proto-Christian time. They're not calling themselves Christians.
Right.
They're just followers of Jesus.
And who knows how much change took place from the 1st century to the 2nd.
So we're talking the 1st century of gospel reading Christians.
Got it. Which is those. Yeah.
The Nicene preacher, they call him, says in his own writings that he encouraged his Christians to go and watch the Hilaria because you can see the mystery of Christ in the mystery of Attis. They sung a hymn. They sung a hymn that was originally a Homeric hymn to Attis.
Right.
And they applied it to Jesus. So it became a hymn to Jesus. And in this hymn, you know what it says? You, the Egyptians call Osiris. All of Phrygia calls you Attis. The Syrians call you Adonis. In Greece, Dionysus. And they're doing a synchronistic hymn to Jesus.
Okay. Neal, here's your problem, is that that's not technically true, okay? But you're saying an ancient author, early Christian, is saying this is what the case is.
That's what he wrote.
And this is what he's saying.
Now, the source that we get that from is from a
heresiologist.
From a heresiologist saying he's a heretic for saying this.
Right, of course.
But that's half a century later.
And even then, he's still pointing out what this guy said that's earlier.
Exactly. Half a century later, as Christians are developing and becoming more dogmatic, getting their creeds together, deciding what they want to be,
separating themselves from Judaism, separating themselves from paganism,
breaking themselves off. They're looking back at this famous Nicene preacher who everyone loved in his time.
Yeah.
He was very famous, and famous enough that they wrote 2 whole chapters on this guy.
Right.
Most people only get a paragraph. He had whole chapters just for him, how important he was.
Right.
It's only him, Valentinus, and Marcion get that much attention.
Right.
Everyone else gets a chapter. This one guy, Saturnius, he was a heretic. He said this. Boom, done. Marcion gets 2 chapters. Valentinus gets 2 long chapters. Nicene preacher, he had the most attention. And so he had so much attention to him, it makes you wonder why. If he was just some random heretic, some idiot out there, like, today you get Christians on YouTube who don't belong to any particular church, and they come up with conspiracy theories about flat earth stuff. Right. And no one's really taken that serious. You don't have the Pope coming out and saying, I got to write a dissertation on this random YouTuber online. Right. He's a heretic. We got to get rid of this. No. The fact that the heresiologists had to spend so much dedication on refuting his stuff means he was leading people in a certain direction that they didn't like. Right. They wanted to.
I think there's political reason behind it.
Political reasons, right. But what it tells you is Christians early on were willing to look at Roman mysteries and compare it with their own.
Right. Yeah, and the question is, if they're willing to compare it, who's to say they aren't also finding inspiration when they're combating, or not just combating, trying to draw in Roman citizens who they want to make members of their own cult? How do you do that? You imitate in a way. You want to model your stuff in a similar way. So I guess it gets to this thing that recently happened with the Olympics. Everyone lost their minds. The conservative Christians lost their minds on Dionysus, purple dude on a table in this well-known people dressed in drag. And they went, this is a mockery of Christianity and the Lord's Supper, and if you don't think so, you're an idiot. And it's like, Then you go back and look at Renaissance art and notice there are Dionysian paintings that look a lot like Dionysus and Jesus, right? The Lord's Supper, which, by the way, why this makes him so butthurt that a 1,500-year later artistic piece by Leonardo is now their canon, technically, that if you make an image of anything about it, it's kind of the same thing about making.
And by the way,
Da
Vinci painted tons of pagan stuff. Like, he was not a perfect saint.
No, you showed me an image he did of Dionysus too. Leonardo did one of Dionysus. So I just want to make the point that they're literally seeing parallels in this modern rendition of a Renaissance art that they canonized into their faith to a point where they're mocked now, when a purple dude should have gave red flags out the gate. The problem is they're seeing similarities, and the similarities to their mind are there. They're authentic connections. Whether or not correlation equals causation doesn't matter. I want to get back to the text, which is why I'm going to do a documentary soon that's going to be paralleling these in this example and going into Dionysus and Jesus. But to use your point, right? We don't have the source that shows they literally invented the gospel narratives, modeling it after the Attis thing that you just described, but giving it its own narrative and its own mythic function within this particular literature of Jesus. We don't have the evidence of them saying, here's your smoking gun. We're doing this to model it and combat the Attis cult and the Roman Empire. We have evidence that they're combating the Roman imperial cult.
Yes.
We have evidence that they're propagandistically jabbing at Jews and Rome.
Yes.
And we have that evidence. They're clearly aware of the teachings and the claims of the Roman emperor with peace.
With Divi Filii, the Son of God.
Son of God.
The idea of a gospel.
Right, or even legion, the Latin word of legion being brought into the Greek.
Yeah, Evangelion is like, you have the Evangelions of Augustus set up as pillars all over the empire, even in the East.
Right.
Where in there it would be the Sebastos.
The question, I guess, once you get to the end of that, realizing there's this clear rhetoric and competition happening where Jesus is the real, through his lineage, he's the true Son of God. He's going to bring peace, not a Pax Romana that's temporary, which you just got to watch the Year of the Four Emperors to find out that the Julio-Claudian line isn't going to work. They're thinking this thing's going to collapse. So here you have someone who's making a claim for everlasting peace, not a temporary peace that's not really going to stand. So all of it's combative politically against the empire in many ways. That was a great point. And what ends up happening, in my view, is people will think that you and me are suffering from parallelomania because we think it's possible. We're not saying it is. It's possible that something like this, that's so influential to the empire and the people of the empire, that celebrate, they mourn, and then they celebrate the death and rise of their Attis figure in some way, shape, or form through festivity, that Jesus would also model that in Greek literature of the day. Like, what is it really ridiculous to think maybe something's going on? And this ties into the mythicist question. One could still say there was a guy. It doesn't matter which path you take, whether he's completely invented or there was a guy. And this still could be the case.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
That's where I'm at right now. I'm open to mythicism being true, and it's possible. I just don't think we have enough to say that was all made up from thin air. I can't go either way.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like, I'm in this space where I'm kind of just letting the evidence sit where it does, and saying, okay, do we have anyone contesting his existence early on? No, we don't have that. If we had that, I might look at it and see what he says about it.
Right.
But we don't have that, so it's like, okay, all we really have to go off of is that people are saying there was a guy, and they're saying he's crucified, and then the rest I can kind of fill in as mythology. Even like someone like Origen, early on, he's questioning Christianity. He's one of the first polemics against Christianity. Some people date him in the 170. Some people date him in 130. Celsus.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly when he wrote. It could be anywhere between 130 and 170.
Got it.
So maybe I'm just going to say 150. Let's put him in the middle.
Okay.
He writes in the middle of the 2nd century, and he criticizes Christianity hard.
Yep.
He doubts the resurrection. He says, all we have to go, it's almost as if he only knows Mark, and the early Mark. Because when he talks about Christianity and the story about Jesus, first of all, he thinks his father's name is Pantera, a Roman soldier.
Right.
That's historicist.
Yeah.
He's not doubting his father he's not saying anything about virgin births or anything. He just says, I heard from rumors from Jews that his father was a Roman soldier named Pantera.
Right.
The Pantera thing was floating around that early.
Yeah.
People will say that's a later Talmud legend. It's not. It's as early as the Gospels.
Clearly, he's hearing it.
Yeah, it's contemporary with it's a few decades after the Gospels. It shows up in the sources in Celsus.
Right.
So that's a point to Historicis. And then he says, all we're going off of is that there was 2 women at the tomb, and some angel told him that he resurrected. That's it. Why should I believe this? It's as if he only knows the earliest mark. Right. Remember how we talked about the early mark doesn't have a physical resurrection. So going off of what Celsus is getting, what he knows in his education and his investigation of Christianity, he thinks there's a guy who got crucified, but I don't think he resurrected. It's a historicist.
Right.
It's a critical historicist take.
Right. He assumes a lot of it.
And that's as early as we can go as far as like finding people who are not just accepting it full cloth.
Yeah.
So I think Celsus is important for that reason. Also, you can see the Christology developing. Mm-hmm. He's becoming more godlike as time goes on.
Yeah.
Mark's gospel, he's the Messiah. He maybe resurrects, depending on how the oldest Mark says. And then the later gospels, Matthew, Luke, and John, develop him into more God. By the time you get to John, he's the Logos incarnate.
Yeah.
So that tells me that there was a development in this direction, not the other way around. Not that he started off as a God being worshipped by everybody and then became man.
Right.
It looks the other way around.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think there's that gradual incline and growth. I like seeing these things that you point out, and I think that was one of the things that made me doubt his existence when I saw a lot of those coming from like Richard Carrier, Bob Price, guys like that. But I think some of the things we started to question made us think maybe there was a guy who actually got mythologized, and that's where we're at now. My goal in doing this video wasn't to critique it. It was to point out that we have more in common with them than we have not in common in terms of trying to find reasons and stuff to doubt that this may have happened. So I guess what I'm saying is you could find details, disagree with that particular detail, say that never happened. That part is mythicist. That never happened. It was invented. But then another part you might think actually did, or something about it is a kernel of truth or memory. The guy died somehow, probably by crucifixion. Okay, when? Maybe not actually when the Gospels narrate that he actually died. How exactly? Maybe not exactly how, like, you know what I mean? But like he probably died. I know that they want more. They want the bone, the femur bone, as I brought up. They want the foreskin of Jesus. They want the tomb in which he was. They
want physical, archaeological evidence. And the problem with that is most people like Jesus, you don't have that,
and you never will.
You're not going to find archaeological evidence for Pythagoras or Socrates. Now they found Plato. It's possible that we can find something like that for Jesus.
To falsify the whole he didn't exist thing, you could find it. But then how do you know that those bones were actually Jesus' bones?
That's what they'll say.
Yeah, so there's always no matter what.
To be fair to them, though, we do have, they give us, like the sources do give us like locations and tomb locations, and there are like possible locations, but we just never found anything.
Yeah.
So the question is, are those locations legit? Is there a Golgotha, right? Is there any that, like sometimes there, and this is the point to the mythicists, they're right, is like if they had these locations early on, and it's so important to the Christians that he was in this tomb, because the tomb is so important to the narrative, you would think they would remember this tomb.
Yeah, where's the veneration of the tomb?
Which
is why it might be a legend invented.
It might be a legend.
The thing is, though, if it was a legend, wouldn't they have early on, and they may have, I mean, there may be 2nd, 3rd century Christians who did point to a tomb and say that's the one, and then they venerated for a while, and there might be separate tombs. Just like today, bro, you and me went to Israel. How many freaking different tombs did Jesus rise from? There's different ones, right?
They took us a bunch of sites that they all thought was the site.
Yeah, they all think that he is where Peter did.
Even the Garden of Gethsemane, it was like, this one's it. Well,
this is the garden. No, that's the garden. No,
they don't know. Nobody knows any of these spots or locations that Jesus was in.
Right.
That was my main takeaway from going there.
It was a lot of this.
How much we don't know what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
The only thing we know for sure was that there was a place where Pilate
That was
out.
Interesting.
We found the place that if it did happen, would have been at that spot where Pilate would have.
But either way,
Jesus
whether
out.
or not Jesus did or didn't, that is where Pilate would have operated his judgments from. He would have sat.
And you can have historical people that actually lived and did things in a setting of it's myth.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. Because we know Pilate existed doesn't mean Jesus existed either.
Right.
But it doesn't mean he didn't either. So you're kind of left in this balance. We're just hanging in the balance of what do we know? Here's the evidence. We can't disprove he existed.
Right.
But we can't prove it either.
And I think we have more in common. It's good that people are challenging and questioning these things, because then we can sharpen our skills and try to investigate further. That's why I like having different views, different opinions. The only thing I'm not entertaining at this point is the idea that this special one virgin birth, right, happened, going back to the most basic thing. This would happen. But when you talk about the one in Suetonius, about divine Augustus, that didn't happen. That's special pleading on a scale, like an unbelievable scale of special pleading that makes me think you're so dishonest. You're just so special pleading.
What's interesting about that is that Augustus is a real person that existed with mythology and legends attributed to him.
We can see it happening.
And they're drawing it from other gods in the Mediterranean.
Right.
Applying it to him.
So I think that's also what's happening with Jesus.
Yeah, I do. Just to give you another example of a God having resurrection attributed to him, and very much like Christ, we have, like I mentioned in another video we did, there's these Orphic tablets, these these golden Orphic tablets that they find them all over the Mediterranean, and they all have they all read like this. Some of them are identical, some of them have little variants in them, but there's hundreds of these things, and they read like this: a kid, I fell into milk.
That's what Dionysus did.
Yeah, but that's also what you do with a
newborn.
A sacrifice.
Hold on, falling into milk?
Yeah, it's like an animal kid falling into milk. It's a sacrificial animal.
I'm thinking of newborn. You know how women will produce milk for
their
but
they're not talking about a child. They're talking about a kid, which is an animal.
Okay.
That's what they call them, kids. It's in the Bible. A kid. It's a lamb. Or it's actually, is it a lamb? I think it's a lamb.
Okay.
But it might be a goat.
Got it.
But it's an animal. A kid. I fell into milk. And it says, welcome thou, who has suffered such suffering as thou hast never been suffered. From man, thou hast become a god. A kid, thou hast fallen into milk. There's a death and a deification. And this is what the people are attaching to themselves. They're wearing these tablets on their burials as they're wrapped for burial, hoping to be resurrected. It's very a lot of even ancient sources compare Dionysus to Osiris, because Osiris was this god of resurrection, and people who were wrapped in burial were hoping that Osiris would take them with him to the underworld or whatever, because he's the ruler of the underworld. So Dionysus in the Greek world plays that role. He's this resurrection god.
Yeah.
He's this, when you're dead, you call out to Dionysus, hoping that you can take part in his resurrection.
Well, that's why
he wasn't mortal, technically.
That's
He's born of a mortal woman.
Right, 100% mortal woman, divine father. But the question I was asking about the kid thing, isn't that a young animal?
Yes.
Okay, so milk. This is why I was thinking of a newborn, like a young, because milk is produced often by all animals. I mean, mammals specifically, and we are mammals. When children are born, you have lactating, you have women produce milk in their breast to feed the child. This is why I thought the kid fell in milk was this idea of saying, like, you're being a newborn in a way.
He explains it too.
Okay, explain it.
And by the way, this is Carl Karenia's landmark book about Dionysus. This is one of the best books on Dionysus. And he's talking about, they're called leaves. They're these Orphic tablets. They're called leaves.
Got it.
One of the leaf, an initiate, speaks of himself, awaits a favorable reception among the gods of the underworld. Very much like Egyptian burial practices. Right. The Egyptians would bury. That's what the Egyptian Book of the Dead is.
Yeah, they bury you.
It's fragments of people's burials, what they wrote on them. And it's always crying out to Osiris
about life.
About life after death.
Yeah, so this is why people say it shouldn't be called the Book of the Dead. It should be the Book of Life.
Book of Life,
because they're asking for life.
But these Greeks are doing this still. Even way later. So this is what it says, and this is in the Hellenistic period. It says, on the other, he expects them to speak to him. He equates himself with the kid that fell into milk. That the kid was in pieces is not said, and so demonstrates his divine rank. The words, thou who hast suffered such sufferings as thou hadst never suffered before, alludes to the dismemberment and clearly state the outcome, the apotheosis. So it's drawing from the Zagreus being torn apart by the Titans.
Or Osiris being ripped into pieces.
Osiris is torn apart too by Set. Very, very good point. So it's like, for a man thou has become a god. The allusion to an initiation through the mystic sacrifice is unmistakable. Thus, we learn that the sacrificed kid was boiled in milk, but was nevertheless to prove its divinity, indestructibility. The identification of a man with the animal, the sacrificial animal, and the god was an addition to the original sacred action, which the Orphics not only reinterpreted, but also employed for purposes of private apotheosis. This could be done through words spoken by the initiate, words such as the Christian author put into the mouth of the sun god. They boil me in a kettle. They spit off the torn. They spit the torn off parts of my body on 7 spits. No Roman or Greek author. I'm sorry. That's that. That's basically it. Oh no, this is it. It was customary for the Romans to boil kid and lamb in milk, to pour milk over them after roasting during sacrifices. So that could have been a lamb.
Right.
They're referring to for Dionysus.
Yeah.
We're getting a little. And by the way, his father in Diodorus of Sicily is the ram god Ammon.
Right.
A child of a ram is a lamb. I'm just.
No.
It could be a little too much, but it doesn't matter about the details. Let's not get hung up on the details. A ram, a lamb, a kid, a goat. Let's look at the technical things.
The ritual, in a way.
Ritualistic, hoping to be resurrected through a sacrifice.
So the context of each setting from anthropology would matter to an anthropologist about the exact details. At the same time, if you're seeing a broader, bigger picture, you see the overlap culturally of this practice, which
I'm more interested in that.
Right, and this ties into the dying and rising thing that we were talking about going from agricultural, using a mythos that is agricultural, which you find in the Bible with Adonis, or you see a Dumuzi, and there's elements of that where they're mourning Dumuzi, and then they're mourning the death and resurrection, right? Hoping for the resurrection of this dead god. The same thing happens with Baal, with Mot, but here they're taking it out of an agricultural, as it says, a private apotheosis. Every Christian, look at was it Becoming Divine? Litwood talks about this a lot. There's other people who talk about this individual divinity which.
The Orthodox Church right now holds the doctrine called Theosis. If you go to become an Orthodox Christian and you move yourself up the ranks and do all the right things, you can attain Theosis.
Yeah, attain
it's being
to God.
one with God.
Ignatius,
so they don't go as far as saying you are God.
No.
But you are you are in the bosom of the God, like Jesus.
Right. This Ignatius, when he wrote his letter to the Romans, I call it the suicide letter. It's like death by cop stuff. He's really like wanting to die. He talks about attaining, he used the term attain to God. In order to attain to God, I must do this, so that I show, not say that I'm a Christian, but to prove that I'm a Christian, I must die and become the food of the wild beasts and make my tomb their stomachs. Like,
it's so much like the Assyrian, Dionysian imagery.
Yeah, he's using a lot of this stuff about going to death so that he can then become immortal with God, attain to God. He uses it over and over in the letter. So there's some crossover, there's some cultural clearly, and to pretend it's not, you have to act like Christians are speaking a different language, but they're trying to recruit these Gentiles who would have known this stuff. These non-Israelite people out here are floating around knowing Attis, knowing Dionysus, knowing these other cults and gods. And then how are they speaking their language?
And not only that, we're talking about a culture who deifies people already.
Right.
You already had Demetrius after Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great's successor, Antigonus, they end up reconquering Macedon from the people that took it from Alexander's family. They killed his mother Olympias. But Antigonus and his son Demetrius go back into Macedon and they liberate them. And then he becomes deified, the god Demetrius.
Right.
And he gets his own temple, he gets his own idol, and the philosophers of the time period are going, our God can breathe and talk. Your gods are just made of wood and statues. It's almost like they're talking about Jesus.
Right.
So Demetrius becomes a god, and they're comparing how he's alive in the same way a Judeo-Christian would say,
Claiming
our
Jesus
God is
alive.
living,
Right.
and your God is just
Even today
stone.
they do this. Christian all the time comments, our God is a living God, how dare you?
Demetrius was a living god.
Right.
Augustus was a living god.
Right.
And these philosophers, these pagan philosophers, would make the same arguments against the
typical religion.
Typical religion
right.
of the day. So it's not that Christianity takes over the pagan Roman Empire. It's that people are moving away in a different direction that Christianity seems to walk into.
Right.
And they match each other perfectly.
Yeah, they grab the philosopher's hands,
The Middle Platonists.
and then they merge it with Christian cult, and they make it unique. And
remember, Heraclitus back in 500 BC was already saying that idolatry is dumb.
Right.
You guys are talking to dumb wooden poles. What are you doing?
Right.
So Greek philosophy is already pushing in that direction.
And Christians pick up the torch.
Yes, Plato was anti-Homer, and he said we need to replace Homer, and people should be looking forward to an afterlife rather than dreading Hades, as did with Achilles.
Right.
So we can see the direction that civilization is going to. But look, I love this topic.
Yeah, and we didn't dwell on mythicism that much, but just to highlight.
But I want to give it credit.
Yeah,
it deserves to be out there. We need good mythicists out there who are going to challenge people.
Right.
Say, how do you know that?
Right.
And that's what we need. We need minimalists. We need mythicists. They have to be in this discussion.
My question is this, final one, and that is, do you see you and Richard Carrier at least connecting again at some point?
Sure. I mean, I'm open to it. I said what I said, and he said what he said, and that's it. We can move. We haven't had any problems ever since.
I'd like to see that happen sometime. That'd be
And
cool.
I think a lot of people go overboard with their hate, with how much they despise the guy because they want, it's not even just Christians. Sometimes it's like people who just are, the scholar said this, so they have to be right. And Carrier's going against the grain. They don't like change or something.
Yeah.
I can't put my finger on it,
Yeah.
but I think he gets too much hate than he should.
All right. Thanks, Neal. Appreciate it, brother.
It's good.